So this video is going to be done a little differently than some of my other ones because right now I am dealing with the most vicious creature around, Pumpkin. This is my puppy, Pumpkin. And he is a menace to society. Are you absolutely evil? Yes, you are. He's a sweetie pie, but he is an absolute demon child. But he's a cute demon child, isn't that right? And my sister put him in a sweater, so that's why he's got his little outfit on. So he's probably going to be bugging me this whole time, but I want to do this, so we're going to do it. So this is going to be my June and July book recap because I only read 2 books in June, which is, it just felt like pointless to make a video with 2 books. So I ended up with a total of 7 because I read 5 in June. I still read some fun books. Time just goes by so fast, and all of a sudden I realized that I haven't gotten through books fast at all. So we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do it now. Now, although I only read 2 books in June, they were both kind of on theme. The first book I read was 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. 7 Days in June. Get it? So this is a romance book that I loved. I thought it was incredible. It's a story. It's kind of like a second chance romance, but also not at all, because it's like a second chance romance, but also not at all. It's kind of more like a rekindling of sorts, because these two, Eva and Shane, fell in love when they were teenagers, and they spent a week together in love, and they were separated by their hectic lives, and they don't see each other again until they're adults. So they both grow up to be successful authors, and they actually base their characters off of each other because they just can't forget that week in June, and it's kind of cutesy. Regardless, they unexpectedly meet at a literary event for Black authors and realize that they still kind of love each other. And so they kind of have to go back and explore their pasts and what they were going through, and how it changed themselves as well as one another, and everything wonderful like that. But regardless, outside of this romance, this book tackles a lot of really important topics, especially about race and the reality of kids growing up in underprivileged Black communities, and also on a larger scale, like larger institutions like publishing, and how being Black authors is a struggle. It's done so beautifully, and I feel like the romance is used as a really great plot device for some of those bigger topics, but it's also a beautiful romance all on its own. And so it just comes together to be a really well done, thoughtful, mature book that I just felt like was perfect. It had a little bit of everything. It was so good. One of my favorite romance books I've ever read. I thought it was absolutely stunning, and there's so much more that I could add in here, but I really just feel like the basis is they're in love, and they have to deal with the reality that the world is tough, and that their romance is real, but it's the world around them and the things that they're struggling with that were limiting them when they were kids. And now that they've grown up and they've learned and they've grown and they've gotten opportunities and they've gotten to where they need to be, now they can be together and they can explore that together. And it's really, really wonderful. And I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. Second book of June, Summer Suns. Get Summer Suns, Summer, June. This book is crazy. It is like half murder mystery, half paranormal, supernatural type story, which was a really cool blend. I felt like they went together really well, and it was so cool how it was both at the same time. So basically, Eddie and Andrew are best friends. Eddie goes away to graduate school. I can't remember where it is. Vanderbilt. So Eddie goes to Vanderbilt, and Andrew is to join him 6 months after. So Eddie has been at Vanderbilt for 6 months, and Andrew is to go and join him. But before he can do that, Eddie dies. And it appears as if he's ended his own life, but Andrew doesn't think that's true, because he knows Eddie better than anybody, and he's certain that Eddie did not take his own life. So what happened? Well, that's what Andrew's trying to figure out. So he decides he's still going to go to Vanderbilt like he was scheduled to all along. But instead of focusing on the school part, he's going to focus on trying to retrace Eddie's steps and figure out what happened to him. And through that, you kind of explore this supernatural, paranormal thing that has been haunting them. And they've had experiences with it since they were children. So this is something that you're kind of unpacking throughout the story. And it's really crazy. It gets really, really, really hectic. It gets really exciting and urgent and crazy, and I love the mystery of it and all the the clues and everything. It is so good. And there's also like, there is like a romance. There's some exploration of sexuality and stuff. And, you know, Andrew meets the people that Eddie has been hanging out with and his roommates and friends, and he kind of, you know, whatever. It's really cool. It's really cool. I loved the environment. I loved the tone. It was super spooky, super cool. Huge recommend for that one. Loved it. So that was all of June, and then we entered July. The first book I read in July was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. Now, Ocean Vuong wrote a poem that I absolutely love called Kissing in Vietnamese, and when I heard this book recommended and I saw who it was by, I knew that I wanted to read it. And so, well, technically, this book is a novel. It is nonfiction. It is like very heavily based off of his own life. In fact, the main character, like the narrator, doesn't even get a name, which in my opinion further symbolizes that it's about himself. The only name that he's given is a nickname, Little Dog. So it's written in a super fascinating way. It's written as a letter from him to his mother, who can't read English specifically. And it just kind of is him describing his life and his family life and his experience as a Vietnamese child growing up in America. He moves there, I think, when he's a toddler, like 2-3 years old. And he's just kind of exploring a lot of topics about the world and like identity, race, class, gender, sexuality, all of the things, and nationality, and, you know, his Vietnamese culture and American culture, and finding where you fit in all that. And it's so jarring at some points, and it's so beautiful at some points, and it's so intricate, and it's woven together in a really cool way. I love the order of it is really interesting, and it's very purposeful because it kind of jumps around a little bit throughout different points in his life, but it feels like a very smooth train of thought, and it feels like, to me at least, it made sense. And I would highly recommend this if you're feeling existential, if you're feeling like you want to be a little sad. It's really cool. Obviously, it talks a lot about family, friendship, love, it's one of those things where it's like just very general life things, and how this individual interpreted and experienced certain life events, which is always good to read about. It's also really important to note that his family, specifically his grandparents, were really impacted by the Vietnam War, and his family is living in the aftermath of that and living with that trauma. And even though he wasn't there, his mom wasn't directly there, they are still experiencing trauma from that. I think that's really interesting how familial trauma works like that, like generational trauma. Really interesting. So I recommend for this book because it's so good. Next, I read an absolutely insane book that I could go on and on about, so I'll try to be quick with it. But The Spirit Bares Its Teeth by Andrew Joseph White. This is crazy. This is a historical fiction with like a little bit of fantasy in it about a transgender boy named Silas. Crazy stuff. Okay, here's how I'll put it. Silas is a transgender boy, so he is perceived as a female by all of those around him. And so he is stuck in this really shitty world where he is, you know, he's a part of this elite society because he has purple eyeballs. And if you have purple eyeballs, you have magic powers-ish. You have a connection to like the spirit world. They call it the veil. You can like go through the veil and you can kind of interact with that supernatural space. And so when males are born with these purple eyes, that's great, that's perfect, that's fun, they're strong, they're powerful. When girls are born with them, that's not so good because they don't want women to have powers. There's a literal law in place that females with violet eyes cannot use their supernatural powers. They cannot interact with the veil because that is like just wrong for some reason. So it's crazy. Silas is obviously suffering, being expected to adhere to these rules and expectations and guidelines that that they're corrupt no matter what, but him being trans makes it all the worse, and it is so impactful and devastating. And pretty much what happens is he is trying to get out of his situation, reasonably so, and so what he ends up doing is getting in trouble, getting caught, trying to be sneaky and get away, and ends up in a school for girls that is supposed to cure girls who are, it's called the veil sickness, which in my opinion is supposed to be like an equivalent to hysteria. So he is sent to this school where it's basically meant to fix girls that they think are out of line. And there's actually this quote that I really need to find. Pumpkin, please leave me alone so that I can find this quote. Please leave me alone so I can find this quote. Stop it. Okay, I need to read this quote. Only 3 of us are here because we were caught opening the veil, because that's not what veil sickness really is. The sickness is what comes after we open the veil. Being with men, rejecting men, acting out, acting alive. If we are not perfect, obviously our power has corrupted us. It doesn't matter how closely we followed their laws. It doesn't matter if there's proof or not. We're sick, so we're guilty. That's all the evidence they need. That is so freaking real. If they decide you're sick, you've got some kind of mental illness that's causing you to act a way that we don't like, they can call you sick and put you in this school and try to get you to conform and to try and fix you. And this book, it's really tense because obviously Silas is uncovering secrets, uncovering, you know, this corrupt society that he's living in. And there's a certain level of betrayal that takes place in this book, and just this feeling of like him just kind of like losing hope in a lot of places where he was at least trying to find it. And like just realizing how truly against him this world really is. 2 other things that I want to mention is Silas is also very clearly neurodivergent, which I think is really interesting. Just reading about, you know, these things that we've only really started considering and caring about in more modern times, like gender, neurodivergency, and other things like that, sexuality, all that. It's so interesting reading about it during a time where people were not nearly as comfortable expressing it and had to be very secretive and hide that kind of thing about them. It's so interesting to read that and know that this was the reality for people like Silas during this time. And it's really eye-opening, and I think it really shows the way that people with these struggles really feel. And I feel like for somebody who is really closed-minded and doesn't really have a good grasp on trying to put themselves in other people's shoes, I feel like this would be a good book to understand and get into the mind space of somebody who experiences the world differently than you. Buddy, get something better in your mouth, not my shirt. And also I want to give a big kind of disclaimer, kind of trigger warning. There's a lot of what is called body horror in this book. There's violence, of course, and 2, Silas wants to be a surgeon, so there's a lot of talk about the internals of a human body, and there's just a lot of stuff like that going on in this book, and some like surgical things and innards. So if that's something that you're really uncomfortable with, that is the only reason I wouldn't recommend this book, is if the body parts things really freaks you out. That's the only reason, genuinely, because everything else about it is absolutely incredible. It's just as much entertaining and infuriating as it is beautiful and insightful, and just something like this author's voice was just so strong, and this book was just written in a way that was so good, so well done. And I know for a fact that I want to read his other book because yeah. Next, I read another crazy book called Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Booley? I don't know how to pronounce it. Like I said, I suck at names and I never look them up, and it's a bad habit. I need to fix that. But this is a story about a Native community, a Native American community, and our main character, who's a teenage girl. And so there are some issues happening in this community involving drugs, gangs, overdoses, and eventually murder. And so pretty much this story is kind of trying to figure out what is happening in this community and why it's happening. And it is so full of goodness. It's a pretty thick book. The words are pretty small margins, but it's worth every second. It's worth every page. It's worth every word. It is so good, and it is so insightful and so full of important things that I feel like aren't talked about enough. And I don't feel like there's enough mainstream media talking about the struggles of the remaining Native communities in America. And it is so sad, but also so eye-opening and devastating. And it discusses a lot of different issues, but more specifically, it's about a murder investigation type thing. It's not a murder mystery. There is a sense of mystery in it for sure with like some of the other stuff that's being investigated, but it's not a murder mystery. You already know what happened with the murders, but there is like some plot twists, some drama, some betrayal, some really heavy emotions. So good. And there's other issues in here as well, like family issues. There's like a romance involved, but which I think is handled really well. There's a little romance in here. Well, it's not little, it's kind of big, but it's not like huge. You know what I'm saying? Once again, a good plot device. And I will say, this is one of those books that I've heard has been banned places. So, you know what they say, read banned books. So read this book, because it deserves to be read, does not deserve to be banned. Next we have Stay True, a memoir by Hua Su. I hope I'm pronouncing that somewhat correct. I think I am. And this is a memoir about, generally, in my opinion, friendship. It kind of follows the life of Hua, specifically in college at Berkeley, and his friendship with a guy named Ken. And Ken does die. Well, he doesn't just die, he's murdered. And I feel like this book is kind of an analysis of their social life at Berkeley, their friendship with each other, and like kind of the philosophy of all that. It's really, really interesting. And the way that it's written is so cool. I love how philosophical it is and how detailed it is and thoughtful it is. This writer is incredibly smart, and it's so interesting to hear about the way that he experiences all of this and understood all of this. And there's also the added layer that Hua Su is the son of Taiwanese immigrants, and Ken is a Japanese American whose family has been in America for generations. There's that difference where, you know, they're both Asian, but in different ways. They have different experiences of what it's like to be in America, because Ken's family, for many generations before him, have been very immersed in America and American culture. But for Hua, his parents haven't been in America for really that long. His parents are a first generation of immigrants to the United States, and so he's still very much so more used to the culture of Taiwan, and it's really, really cool. And so he's able to explore stuff like that while also just exploring the general concept of his friendship with Ken, their friendship with the people around them, and also their relationship to pop culture and everything. It takes place in the 90s, so there's a lot of really cool references to 90s pop culture. Like, for example, Hua really likes Nirvana. Ken really likes Pearl Jam. And so, as you can imagine, there's a little bit of conflict there. It's a really, really well done book. And there were some references that I didn't get because I was born in 2004. But I don't feel like it was too much or too confusing. I feel like it was done just perfectly. Once again, I just love a book that is insightful and thoughtful and just kind of talks about life. And I love reading about different experiences of life and different experiences of the world as opposed to myself. And this is so good. And I would highly recommend this. It's short, but there's so much goodness in there, and it's easy to read. It's really interesting. It's really beautiful, and it gets you thinking. So read this one too. So this last book is going to be a bit not like the others. I got a blind date with a book, and I knew that it was going to be a romance book, and it didn't have any other information on the cover, so I was like, okay, we'll just see what we get. And it was a hockey romance called Body Check by Elle Kennedy. I have never read a hockey romance before this book, and I made a TikTok on my TikTok, which is just like Live Catherine, talking about this book and my thoughts on it. And I'll say what I said there and what I'll say here is that it is definitely what I can only assume, obviously I don't know, but I can only assume is the kind of like blueprint for this genre, like copy paste type structure for a hockey romance book, because there's two main conflicts. The romance between these two, and he's kind of pining after her, and she's like, we should keep it casual, and he's like, but I love you. Well, he doesn't say that, but you know what I mean. And there is a hockey scandal. I know. Pumpkin looked at me when I gasped. It's like a game setting scandal, and they're like the team is being accused of like taking bribes, and it's pretty intense in the hockey world, clearly. And okay, this is Hayden, this is Brody. Hayden, her dad owns the team that Brody plays on. So like that's how they're connected. And so Hayden is dealing with the stress of like her dad is going through this really big thing with his team being accused of this, and he's going through a divorce with her stepmom, who's also like only a few years older than her. But like everything in this book happens just how you would expect it to. You know, nothing about this book interested or surprised me or really intrigued me in any way. I mean, there's kind of an attempt at some plot twists, but those didn't really do it for me either. It was just, I wouldn't say it was bad. I wouldn't say that anything bad happens in this book or that there's like any particularly terrible writing or terrible instances, but it was just so plain and so lacking for me that was just like, okay, buddy. That was like all I could, that's all I could take out of this book. I gave it a 1 out of 5 simply because I just didn't really care about it ever at any point in this book. So that's just how that happened. I don't think that hockey romance is for me. I kind of knew it wasn't going to be for me, but I bought the book. I bought the blind date with the book, so I had to read it. I wasn't going to just waste my money on this thing. So this was me for the last 2 months. Pretty incredible stuff. Pretty much all of these books were really good except for this one. But everything else I felt really, really amazed by and that I really, really enjoyed. So that's really good. And I would pretty much give all of these a recommend. I would even recommend this one if that's your thing, like a super easy romance, hockey, smutty read. Like, I would totally recommend this if that's what you're interested in. That's just not my thing per se. Like, I don't give this disclaimer as often as I probably should when I talk about books, but like obviously this is all my own experience. I rate and discuss books based off of how I felt about them and the kinds of things that I felt and experienced while reading them. I'm not trying to make any like objective grand statements about anything because that's not me. I'm not a judge, and not everybody has to agree with my judgments of things, like obviously. So you know what I mean. Thank you so much. And Pumpkin spent that entire time bugging me, and now he's decided he's ready to sleep, so whatever. Have a good day, good night, good everything. Bye.